Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Strip by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. I am your host, Steph Sia. I'm the host of the show. I bring you new episodes every single Sunday about the sex industry, people who are involved in it, people who work in it, clients who buy it, everything that you can think of in terms of like how it contributes to our industry and ways that we can destigmatize our industry, because as you know, there's a lot of stigma, a lot of negativity and stereotypes that come around with it because sex sells. So that's just a little bit about me. I am also a stripper, a former sugar baby, as well as an online content creator. And if you are an online content creator, you may want to listen to this episode because this episode is all about sexting. And for me personally, sexting is a huge part of some of the online work that I do. It's really, really important that we can communicate that effectively, being successful in that, having good wins, all of that. We are going to be bringing on this week's guest, Elizabeth Dell, who is the founder of Amorus, the app, which is a digital online intimacy app, which we will get into detail later on. But Elizabeth, are you there?
I am here. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you. I'm super excited. I know we connected on Twitter not too long ago, and you were up to some really, really cool things in terms of sex tech and like sexual technology. So I'm really excited to chat about that later on in the episode. But I'm really, really glad that we were able to connect and finally were able to get you onto the show.
I love it. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about sexting, talk about communication and sexy talk and everything in between.
Awesome. And I think because we were trying to schedule things out, and I know you just came back from a sex conference. I did.
Sext Down South. At Sext Down South in Atlanta, which was a really fun time. It was also my first time out in the world post-COVID, so it was fun to do that with a whole bunch of sex educators.
That is so cool. What was that conference about? Sexual education, different kind of education?
Yeah. So Sext Down South is it's kind of a hybrid conference, which I really adore, in that it is sort of for sex educators, but also just for individuals. And so a lot of the content is oriented around content that is useful kind of for both parties. So it's not just counselors or therapists talking to other therapists.
Right.
Instead, it's a lot of people who work with the general public, or work with couples, or work with single people, or work in kink, talking about what they do and how they do it. And a lot of times, the audience would be people who were just personally really interested, or they might be people who are like, oh, I teach these kinds of classes, or I do this kind of coaching around sexuality, but this is something that maybe I could add into my repertoire, and let me learn what other people are teaching.
Cool.
And a lot of very kink friendly, very progressive, really BIPOC oriented, so really oriented around underrepresented voices and sexuality and kink and alternative sexuality. So it was a really great time.
That's
really
awesome.
wonderful.
Yeah, you mentioned that to me and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And of course I'm just hearing about it now, but what if you want to share, what were your main takeaways from the conference for you personally?
For me personally, it was just so great to connect directly with people. I think getting, this was my first time kind of taking Amorus on the road, and it was really great to talk to other counselors, to talk to educators, to talk to instructors, to see the world really be excited about what I was building, which is nice because, when you're building in the COVID, you're kind of in a vacuum. I mean, I think that's something that all sort of online creators deal with, is that you're kind of putting things out in the world and you believe that people will respond, but you don't get a lot of actual interaction. So it was really powerful to talk to real humans and connect with real humans.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess obviously you were there to represent Amorus, your app?
Yeah, to represent Amorus, but also to learn. I mean, there were wonderful there were wonderful people like in presentations that I was like, oh, that's really interesting, about sort of like what's your sexuality type, and I was like, could we gamify that? Could we turn that into a game that could go on the app?
Cool.
Or there was another talk that I listened to that was all about how do we manage rejection, and especially how do we manage rejection in our primary relationships, and how do people handle it? What does it do to our bodies? What are ways that we can process it? What are best tools and tricks? And again, Amorous is all about intimacy and interaction, and rejection and handling when things don't go well is a big part of that. So that felt really powerful, and I was taking a bunch of notes, and I was like, okay, how can I incorporate some of the best practices I'm learning here into the app? How can I give that as advice, or how can I make a game around two people telling each other no, but make that feel more comfortable? I remember from before the COVID, live alternative sort of sexuality and sort of swing and poly events, we would often do these rejection exercises at the top of the event. Everyone would go around, and it would be an exercise that you have to ask someone for something, and they have to tell you no. They have to, you say, can I have a hug? And they say, no, I'm not going to give you a hug. And then you usually say, thank you for taking care of yourself. And it's this exercise at the top of the event to kind of remind everybody that rejection, that boundaries are a really important aspect of sexuality.
Absolutely.
And so integrating that into the app is something I'm thinking about. So really great, thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like you're super jazzed about this, so that's really, really cool. Like, I'll have to keep, and also listeners too, keep in mind for next year, I guess, if Sex Down South returns. So hopefully we can check that out next year. But a little bit of side tangent there, but I just wanted to check in. But what about you yourself? Like, if you want to tell the audience, or if you want to describe to the audience who you are and what it is that you do in a nutshell, or a long nutshell, up to you, in a bowl of peanut butter, whatever you want to do, feel free to go ahead.
Sure. So I am the founder of Amorus, and Amorus is an app for intimacy between partners. So what does that mean? It's basically a sexting app, but it's kind of sexting in the best way possible. So sexting, which I think I adore sexting. It was one of the things that helped me get through the pandemic.
Yes.
But even in the pandemic, and even as someone who, I'll be honest, I have spent 5 years practicing my sexting. I think I'm actually pretty ninja at it. But I was, once we were sheltered in, everyone was quarantined in their homes at the beginning of the pandemic last year, I wasn't with my partner, and I really needed intimacy and pleasure, and I needed to access my sexuality.
Yes.
And I wasn't maybe bringing the best self to the table. Like, it was an apocalypse. It was really hard to be creative and to come up with a new idea and a new role play and I just got really frustrated. I was like, why is this so hard? And then I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll just go looking for tools that'll help me. This is sex. I'm sure there's a million things out there that will help make this better. And I went looking, and I was really disappointed. There was definitely a lot of things. There's amazing content if you're a single person and you're sort of absorbing content. But there was very little designed to help two people interact with each other better. And most of what I found was kind of really simple, rather cheesy truth or dare in an app.
Oh,
or
I see, yeah.
It was, it was kind of sleazy, or it was like, here are sexting lines. Here's a list of 150 lines that you can sexy chat to your boo.
Oh my gosh.
Like, none of this is exactly what I'm looking for. Like, I just want you to help make me better at this.
Yeah.
And that was very frustrating. And then a light bulb went off, and I was like, wait, maybe other people have this same issue.
Yeah.
Maybe I should help make sexting better. So that's what I decided to do. And there was a few months of sort of casting around, and I had all these ideas, and I was like, am I making a game? Am I making a toy? What am I doing? And then I figured out that what I want to do is intimacy and is communication. And so at its core, what Amorous is a messaging app.
Right.
Because at its core, what two people are doing when they're not in the same room is that they are communicating with each other. And so a messaging app is how we communicate in a digital world.
Right.
And so it's a messaging app, but it's a messaging app that blends in kind of an activity app in the same way that a Calm or a Headspace or 10% Happier is a meditation app that helps me meditate, actually do the meditation, but also just helps me be better at meditating because it helps me remember to do it, and it helps me think about what kinds of meditation. Is this a gratitude? Is sleep? Is this a... It helps me organize it. It just helps me incorporate all those best practices.
Right.
That's what I wanted to do with Amorus. I wanted Amorus to be a place that by sexting here, you can just make it richer and better and more creative and more private and more inspired, because all those tools are built into the platform and just picking you up and just making the thing that you're doing, which is sexy time with your person, better.
Wow.
And so it is a messaging app that has embedded in it a bunch of different games. There's
cool.
3 because we're brand new. So the app launched into our beta in May of this year in the App Store and on Android. Thank you. And we're just actually starting to bring the public into the app. So we're at our first early adopters in August and September. And so we're kind of getting the word out, but it has 3 games in it that help people come up with new ways to talk to each other, uncover shared fantasies, and now I'm pitching the app. Sorry, I said I would do that later. but that was my inspiration.
Wow.
A little bit of just background on me. Before the pandemic, I'm a film producer. So I have made a bunch of movies, including a movie called Destination Wedding with Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder. Yes. And I made independent feature films prior to the pandemic and then decided to get into sex tech.
Wow, what a 180.
Well, I mean, I think of being a producer as being a storyteller and an entrepreneur, right? You're building companies with every movie and bringing all the pieces together. And then you're also being a storyteller and you're being a communicator. You're trying to understand what motivates people, what motivates their emotions, and tell a story that'll do that. Right. In this case, now I'm kind of just applying that rather than to push the story out to people, to help people tell their own stories to each other.
There we go. So it is pretty much related then. In that vein.
That's what I say.
It's a good stretch. That's really cool. So I mean, I like this. This sounds really interesting, and we'll go into the pitching later, and we'll go into all the details of Amorus later because I'm super excited about it. But I know a large chunk of this because it is a messaging app and it is a big communication platform. It's all about breaking down what communication is. What is sexting, really, right? So, we want to... I know, my listeners are really curious about, always trying to get better at sexting. And that was the problem that you're trying to fix, too, is to how to make sexting better. So, before we go into that, why don't we go break down some really key points that you kind of sent me your notes earlier, but key points in terms of, what makes a great communicator, because that is sexting at its core. It's communicating with somebody, right? So why don't we go into that?
Sure. Well, so at its very core, sexting is communication about sex. It is sexual communication. And so the best practices for communication and the best practices for sex are the things that are going to make you better at sexting, right? You're just adding them together. So if you're good at each one individually, if you're thinking about each one individually and you're improving that, you'll be better. And so what does that mean? For me, I think first about communication, right? How do we communicate well? How do we, what makes communication work, right? And for me, there's, I think, an emotional component to that.
Totally.
And there's an action component to that.
Right.
So on the emotional component, it is the things that, motivate us when we talk to anyone, when we talk to a friend, a neighbor, someone in a store, or when a brand tries to talk to us and we, like it or we don't. It's about honesty.
Right.
Does this feel authentic? Do I feel like I'm really hearing a person who's expressing honest emotion to me?
Right.
It's about vulnerability.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
We like to see people share. We like to see people as people. And so and strength is seductive often, but strength doesn't attract in the same way that vulnerability does. Sort of
Right.
sharing something unseen is incredibly seductive. It's incredibly engaging because
Yes.
again, it goes back to that honesty, that authenticity. And then also empathy, or you could call it compassion.
Yeah.
But like feeling like you're treating someone else well, and then the feeling that someone else from you is getting that, oh, this is someone who is going to treat me well. Right? So
Absolutely.
if both parties can have that honesty, vulnerability, and empathy, those three things I think are the recipe for great sexting.
Totally.
And I'll say this now, and I'm sure I'll say it again. Great sexting doesn't need to be a deep dive into one's emotional truths. Right? I
Yes.
don't want to say that, like, when I talk about sort of the emotional truths here, I don't want to say that, like, hey, your sexting can't just be, like, hot and raunchy and, or giggly or cheeky or, like, weird and role-playing aliens. Like, all of those things.
Yeah.
But if it feels honest at the same time, if you're like, actually, I've never told anyone, but I really do think a tentacle would be cool. Like, you're being vulnerable. Like,
Yeah.
you're having a really good time, but you're being vulnerable. So yeah, presenting that. And then I would say, action-wise, the three things that good communication has is listening, acknowledgement,
Yes.
and direct response. So what does that mean? One, listening, or in sexting terms, sometimes it's reading.
Yes.
But like listening and reading as opposed to waiting. Right?
Right.
Like
Right. Big difference.
Yeah, this is not I have a scripted out, 60 different text messages and this is the order. And when someone says something to me, I'm just sending them the next thing in line. Sexting is all about listening or reading what the other person's saying to you.
Yeah.
And if you're like, how about we do, Pharaoh Queen and Slave Boy, and the person comes back and says, that doesn't feel right to me, and you go, okay, so my Pharaoh Queen is doing this. Like,
Yeah.
that's
no.
not fun.
No, it's
so
not.
it's about listening, and then it's about acknowledgement. Right? Everybody wants to be seen.
Totally.
So you say, I don't want to have a slave girl. I don't want to be a slave boy. And then my response is, okay, you don't want to be a slave boy. I acknowledge that. Like, I see that. I understand that. I maybe even repeat it back to you. That, like, I hear you. I understand what you're saying to me. And then direct response. Like, you don't want to be a slave boy. How do you feel about being a visiting Roman general? Does that sound interesting? Right? And so you are directly responding to the change in circumstances, to what the person said. So, and these are, honestly, these are communication skills that work in every level of communication. They work on the phone with the insurance agent the same way they work in sexting. It's about, honesty, vulnerability, and compassion in how you're approaching the thing that you're doing.
Right.
And it's about listening, acknowledging, and responding directly in like what you are actually doing.
Right.
From, message to message to message. So
yeah, no,
those are my communication. That's like my big communication tips and tricks.
No, they're excellent. They're so good, and they're so key. And like sometimes I feel like oftentimes we might lose sight of that, whether or not you're in sex work. I just feel like sometimes we tend to go on autopilot, and we know when you get a new client, you try to apply the same rules that from like one client to the next, and it doesn't really work that way because like every client is going to be different, and they're going to have different needs or different, they have different boundaries and stuff too, different fantasies and stuff, right? So
yeah. And I should say, when I talk about vulnerability, I don't mean having no boundaries. Like, I am all for having boundaries, and I think in all kinds of conversations, there are things you share and things you don't.
Yes.
Vulnerability can just mean sharing, hey, that thing that you said to me really turns me on.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to admit my pleasure. I'm willing to be vulnerable about the pleasure that I'm feeling. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to share every aspect of your life or even, a large chunk of them.
No, yeah. Like, I think it's like a lot of it is, and I mean, communication is part of this, but it's really key to building these key relationships because you are building connection with somebody. I mean, at least in the sex work aspect, it's really important to gain that kind of connection and to know who your clients are, what they like and dislike. It's not just always about you. And sometimes, like, I see posts on Twitter and stuff, and it's all like me, and like maybe that fits the role that you're playing or whatever type of sex work that is that you do. But at the same time, you're going to get so much more out of it if you pay attention a little bit to what your clients' needs are as well. It's a two-way street. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think exactly. I think that for really good communication, it has to be a two-way street.
I love all these points that you've mentioned here. Just being vulnerable, acknowledging, and not just like in through one ear and out through the other ear. Like intently listening and really, really honing in on those skills is like absolutely important in your success, whether or not you're a sex worker or like or if you're just sexting your partner and whatnot. Like if you want to gain a good response, like you'll have to kind of tap into these skills.
Yeah, and I think in any of our connections, whether those connections are a client relationship or an individual personal relationship, people want to be seen.
Yes.
We want to be understood. And so that acknowledgement is a way to say, I see you. I hear the things that you are telling me that you like, that you don't like, that turn you on, that don't turn you on. And being acknowledged is just incredibly powerful.
Yes.
I remember I had someone, I'm going to share it with everyone on this call and maybe someone will run with it. I had someone observe once that they thought there was a missing type of porn in the world.
Okay.
And that there should be validation porn. That there should be porn where it's maybe the POV and the whole thing is just about validating the person who can feel like they're in the scene. And it's all about, you're wonderful and you are so sexy and you are so hot, and kind of doing POV porn that's just an acknowledgement and a sort of even if it's false, even if it's a pre-recorded scene, but it's a way for someone watching it to feel like they're being validated.
Yeah, totally.
Like, that's actually really powerful.
I
can imagine that would be a really remarkable thing to watch if you could get it feeling really like you're in a POV game or something.
Totally.
And that was someone pouring all that validation onto you. So
that's really cool.
We all want that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just so important. Like, I'll draw an example from my own life as well. So I do have, I guess I would call him a sugar daddy, but now we were just reduced now to just sexting mainly, and it's all based on like a messaging app. And I've known this client for at least 4 years now, so I've kind of gotten to know what he likes, what he dislikes, and he's very, very specific about like imagery and visuals. So he's all about like the white thigh highs and the stiletto pump heel, and like I have to wear like a schoolgirl outfit, and me trying to emulate that type of role play and that fantasy in there. He's always just so impressed, like, oh my god, you still remember this? And it's those small details that really, really can make a big difference and can make or break you having more regular customers and people that are going to return, rather than just like a one-off here and there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Feeling like, this is one of the ways we build loyalty between people, is the feeling like there's an investment there, that you're invested in them and they're invested in you.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we wanted to talk about like the rhythm when it comes to sexting.
Yeah.
So why don't we go into that, like in terms of like introduction, flirting, gaining consent, all that stuff.
So I like to think about this, the big idea, I guess this is the other piece, right? Like if sexting is sexual communication, we talked a bunch about communication, it's also sex.
Yes.
Sexting is sex. And that is one of my, like, if I could have a big banner to hang in our one of these days, Amorus's offices, I would have a banner that says in huge letters, "Sexting is sex."
Yes.
And I think that people forget that. And the reason I think it's important to remember is that sex has a lot of rhythms.
Yeah, it does.
So does sexting. And the rhythms of one are the rhythms of the other, right?
Right.
Like, there is a rhythm of flirting, and then flirting sort of moves into maybe seduction, and then there's a process of seeing, of testing the waters, of getting. I mean, there's getting consent very much, but even once you are in that, once you have the consent, there's a process, there's a narrative structure. Going back to the filmmaking, sex has a narrative. It starts slow and it builds tension and it ramps up and then it peaks and then it has a lovely, beautiful sort of after curve.
Yes.
And those moments in sexting exist just like they exist in sex. There is flirting, there is seduction, there is consent, there's level setting, there's negotiation, and that figuring out of what do we like, what do we want now, what do we want today. Going back to the Pharaoh, Egyptian queen, and the Roman general, is it Cleopatra, is it Spartacus, like what do we want today? And then there's the rhythm of building the speed, building the energy, building the tension in the sex. And then there's also the aftercare. I think BDSM is one of the things I adore about BDSM in that culture is the acknowledgement of aftercare.
Right.
Is this idea of understanding that once you peak, you're not just done.
Right.
And in fact, if you walk away at that point, you will walk away wrong. Like, that isn't the best. What you need to do is come down off that peak together. You need to have a moment.
Yes.
If that's, kind of walking it home or saying that was really fun or, whatever that is, but that aftercare, that all those pieces are part of it. And I think it's really useful if you're looking to improve your sexting skill, thinking about the pace, the narrative, is now the appropriate time to send a full body nude, or is there a rhythm to this, and to start with something a little bit flirtatious and then something a little bit more seductive, that rhythm, that drawing people in, that sort of stages and stages of reveals that gives you that really nice beginning, middle, and end that feels like you've told each other a story.
Yeah.
And a really good story.
That's so important. And I love how you mentioned, like, this seduction aspect of it, and just, like, and the timing of it, too, because, like, sometimes I feel, and I'm totally guilty of this, too, like, sending things too fast, or just, like, not getting the rhythm right, or, for example, if I'm busy and I'm sexting with someone and I like run to like do the dishes and I come back and it's just like, okay, well, I'm not like in the mood anymore, or your partner or your client is like wondering where you went, like I'm definitely guilty of that.
yeah. And I don't think that, what I have is a lot of suggestions to offer. I don't have answers. And what I mean by that is that I think everybody's rhythms are different. And everybody's rhythms are different even between the same two people. One day the rhythm might be hot and heavy, and somebody might be like, hey, I just had this huge win in the office, and I'm like flushed with adrenaline, and I'm already like raring to go, and I'm already at like 75%, and I want to start at 75%. And then there's another day where someone's like, hey, I actually had a really terrible day at the office, or I had a really, something else.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling in need of some soothing.
Yeah.
And I want this to be sexual, but I also need some comforting, and I also need, time to ease into it, because maybe I'm at 10% or I'm at negative 15%. And I need that sort of settling in, and that just the natural intimacy of, I don't want to start with like, what kind of sex do you want tonight? I want to start with, how are you?
Yeah.
I want to start with, let me lend a sympathetic ear to something that you need to tell me. I have sexting partners that I don't know I don't know them personally, or I've had them in the past, but I still know about their lives, because intimacy is sharing.
Yes.
And sometimes you want to share just even the smallest details about a life to sort of feel like you're being matched, and to find that rhythm. And so I think a big part of the rhythm of sexting and sexuality, the flirting, and then the beginning part is about matching rhythm.
Yeah.
Right? It's about, and when I talk about, as I talk about sort of level setting and negotiation, it's about, okay, what are you in the mood for? What's the rhythm today? And how do we find it, and how do we share it, and how do we, match to each other? Oh, are you like asynchronously responding every 20 minutes? Okay, that's the rhythm we're in right now. We should both go do other things, and we'll just, we're not yet ready, but then all of a sudden there's this pace increase that starts to happen, and people are like messaging back every minute, or the little green dot that says they're online is just constantly on, and you're like, oh, okay, you're here now, we're in this, okay, let's speed this up, let's start moving quicker, like we're getting into the good stuff, not euphemistically like the clothes are coming off. It's getting to that. and part of great sexting is learning to recognize those, and to learning in a particular person, in a particular client, hearing those rhythms, and learning, and them learning your rhythms, and figuring out what are the things that get you really excited. What are and those rhythms are pacing. Those rhythms are also just, what are the phrases that you come back to again and again? What is the thing that the person says, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's your trigger. Oh, okay, I'm gonna make sure, you talked about swiveling your hips, and for you, that phrase, swivel your hips, is maybe really exciting to this person. So I'm gonna come back to that phrase again and again, because I'm learning that this is the thing that gets your juices bubbling.
Yeah, taking a mental note for sure. That's super, super helpful. I think in terms of when you're first starting out, or you're just starting to sext with someone, whether or not they're your client or your partner or whomever, I know I hear this a lot too, that the hardest part is just getting things started, and how do you find that rhythm, as you've been mentioning? How do you ease into things? Is it going to start off with a hey, how are you, and how do you transition from a hey, how are you, or a normal type conversation, over to something sexual?
Yeah, well, this is going to seem almost silly in its simplicity, but the biggest piece of advice I can give in every question about sexting is just ask. I know, often, and there's lots of different ways you can ask, but I think of things like, can I ask you a more intimate question? Do you want to hear a fantasy of mine? Can I tell you about a dream I had? That sounds kind of flirty. Do you want to tell me more? Inviting people in, sort of, and that last sentence was sort of acknowledgement. And a question, right? It was, that sounds kind of flirty. Do you want to tell me more? It's, you're doing a lot of things in a sentence like that. You are saying, that sounds like it's a sexy thing, but you're giving someone an out to be like, oh no, that wasn't a sexy thing.
Yeah.
Actually, I wasn't trying to flirt with you. But you're sort of giving them the opportunity to say, yes, I want to hear more. Can we pursue that? You're giving them an opportunity to give consent. You're giving them an opportunity to say, this is a thing I want to lean into. And so I'm a huge believer in questions, in asking and using questions.
That's great. That's really good.
Yeah, giving people, can I ask you a more intimate question? Have you done this before? These are all the kinds of good good ways to introduce a little bit more sexiness.
Absolutely. And
is that an innuendo?
Yeah, and it could be. It very well could be. I mean, I just want to take a minute here to stop and appreciate your language that you use. It's so inviting, but also acknowledging that people have boundaries as well too. You're not making any assumptions. Where did you learn to phrase that in a certain way? Because I think a lot of people might struggle with that too. Well,
I mean, personally, I have I'm a grand nerd about communication and about, people. I have always, my entire life, been fascinated by people. To the point where, I'm the friend that people call up and they're like, okay, I have this tricky situation with my husband. I want him to do this. I need to tell him that. Like, what's the good way to introduce this to, like, get me to the outcome I want? And like, how do I navigate this situation with my boss? Or how do I, I've always been that person that can help with that. And it's because I love thinking about people. I don't know if it's a firstborn thing that maybe I was really shy when I was a kid, so I just really always wanted to sit in the back and watch how people interacted with each other and observe. But then piled onto that is certainly I'm a certified sex educator. I've done a lot of classes in sexuality and education around that, and also just been really fascinated with sexuality for most of my life, and so participated in tantra classes and taken courses on this and that, and gone to this event at a dungeon or this event, and so I've had an opportunity to just hear a lot of incredibly smart educators talk about sexuality and kind of say, "Oh, I like what you just did there," and and so that's a lot of what I'm incorporating in. And also I just love sexting, so I've just practiced a whole lot of times, and then you're like, "Oh, I like what we did there. That turned out to be a really great night. How did that happen? That sort of died on the vine. What went wrong there?" And I'm the kind of person who likes to sort of not necessarily debrief if the partner is just a one-time kind of conversation, but I'll do like a little after-action report for myself. I'm like, "Oh, so that failed, and what happened? Like, what went wrong there? That was not the sexy night that I wanted." And okay, so like that person's pace was off, or like I showed up, a bit tipsy on my phone at the end of a night, and I was raring to go. The person I found was not the person. Like, they were not in that place. And notice you need to find a way to match.
Totally.
But I also just want everybody to have a really good time. And so
important.
I'm all for like how do you find great ways in?
Absolutely. And like so many things that you said there too. Practice makes perfect, as like cliche as it sounds. Like if you're not sexting every day, or if you sext like once a year or something, and that's okay too. Like you might be a little bit more rusty, and like it might not come to you as naturally as people that have been doing it for a long time or on a more consistent basis. So I think that's really, really, really good to note. So
I would, and if that's the case, I would put it out there that like that's vulnerability. Just be like, "I don't think I'm really good at this, but like I want to go on this journey with you. Teach me, and if it gets awkward and weird, just call it out, own it. Be like, oh, that got awkward and weird because I'm learning how to do this. Like, what do you think would be a better way? What should I have said? Wait, can I take that back and rewrite it? Like, those kinds of things can be charming.
It can be. Totally. I mean, the good thing about sexting is that, like, you have, depending on the app you use, all of the history will be there. So you can kind of go back and scroll back to see, okay, what worked and what point did it start dying, or when did I fall off the bandwagon here? So,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Did you want to include any other tips and stuff like that? Or like, do you like recommend any scripts and stuff? Like personally, I don't like any scripts. I try to stay away from that. I just try to stay within my own comfort zone. But like, any other last minute tips for those who want to get better at sexting?
Well, I would say I don't want to really offer any particular scripts, but I would say it can be helpful to think about the types of conversations that are available, and like what sort of categories of conversations that are good kinds of sexting conversations. And any given sexting exchange might be a bunch of different things, but I think of some of the like big categories that are good for fun, sexy conversation are talking about your past history, Like talking about
yeah.
things that have happened individually to each person. You know, this one time I had sex in a cave, or, you know, describing things in your individual past.
Right.
If you're two people that have a relationship with each other, reliving a shared history, revisiting, do you remember that time in that hotel? And let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And then that often really naturally leads to like projected future histories, right? Like,
Yeah.
what if we did this way? What if we, and that can be, you know, writing out a story of just what we're going to do in a hotel room, and then that can also lead to something even more complicated, like a role play, or, you know, take character, something like that. And then especially if it's early stage, yes, no, maybe lists or something, some version of that, I think is also a great way to start a sexy conversation that lends into sexting. Like, what are you into? Being the most basic question of that. But what kinds of things are you into? What have you tried? Have you ever done this? Would you want to try that? What's, you know, and in fact, it's like, it doesn't sound sexy, but when you are building an atmosphere of kind of, you're trying to build a place that feels safe to have a conversation, sometimes starting on the nose can actually be a great way in.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel quite so vulnerable to talk about where are your limits, where are your boundaries, what's a hard pass for you. Like, people don't feel as vulnerable when they're talking often about that versus what things they desire.
Right.
And so it's a way to, you know, learn your partner, learn what's going to be good for them, what's going to be good today and in the future. And then that can sort of naturally be like, oh, well, if you don't like that, then you wouldn't like this. And then, actually, and you're like, ooh, so, you know, and then, okay, now let's, and look, now we've turned around to talking about things that we like, and then that naturally leads into, like, what would it be like doing it together, or what would it feel like together, or what if I did, what if you did that too?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of it is just setting it up, setting the tone, as you mentioned. It's that build up is so important and so powerful that it's really, I wouldn't recommend skipping that at all.
Yeah. And then the one thing I would say is that these pacing, this idea of pacing, it's not just text, it's whatever means of communication you have. You know, so if you're sharing pictures, if you're someone who really just likes to share pictures, you don't need to start with the most explicit picture. You can start with a shot of toenails, or with a shot of an ankle, or the shot of a wrist. You know, a picture of, you can start with pictures of other people. You know, Tumblr was great for this.
Yes.
You can share, like, here's a thing that I desire. Here's a picture that seems erotic and beautiful to me. And sometimes sharing images that aren't yourself for either person feels a little safer. Like, it feels a little bit more comfortable to share a beautiful picture from the internet, but you're still sharing a thing that turns you on, a thing that gets you excited. You know, you're sharing a bit of your humanity, your pleasure, and then you can go from there to pictures of,
there we
go.
Whatever.
So thinking about that pacing and the tension and the giving it time to build in whatever means of communication you're.
Yeah, this is all key. So thank you so much for that. I want to leave some time to speak about your app, Amorus, as well. So why don't we take this time to switch gears and talk about Amorus? I mean, thank you so much for sharing your story on how you got started. Obviously, in the startup world, you're trying to fill a void, and you notice that, like, there wasn't anything out there for either couples or any kind of other relationships too. So like, tell us about the app. Like, it's a digital intimacy app. It's a messaging app. Like, who is it for? Like, tell us all the details.
I mean, ultimately, I hope that Amorous can be for everyone. I mean, almost all of us are sexting. I actually did some surveys at the beginning of building out Amorous, and the number that my surveys came to was just over 85%. So 85% of strangers on the internet that you ask in an anonymous survey will tell you that they sext. So basically, all of us who has a cell phone is probably sexting on.
Most likely.
I mean, it's a thing that we all do. And so eventually I would love it if, you know, we all can feel comfortable. Everyone can be on here using this. When people ask me like, what does ultimate success for Amorous look like?
Right.
And I'm a content producer, so I think I go to like content as an example, but I think of, in 5 years or in 3 years, I want to see whatever the HBO's newest, like, Insecure kind of comedy. And you see two people sitting in a bar, and one friend turns to the other and goes, "Oh my God, can you believe he sent me this picture? What does he think? We're on Amorous together?" That's what I want. I want it to be the kind of thing that everybody has on their phone.
Yeah.
And nobody feels bad about it. And this is just part of acknowledging that we are all sexy beings out there exchanging pleasure with our preferred and selected partners.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, before that, I am really looking to connect. I would love to connect Amorous with people who are engaged with their sexuality, people who have someone that they want to sext with. So I should say that Amorous is an app for connected people who can connect with each other in advance. It is not an app it doesn't have a marketplace right now. There's no dating aspect to it. You can't go and sort of find a sexting partner on Amorous.
Gotcha.
You can have a person that you want to connect with, and you can send them a link. But I really built it, coming out of a lot of years dating and in Los Angeles and dating and being ethically non-monogamous in a very populated area. A lot of the issues that came up there I tried to incorporate in the app. So what does that mean? It means that you don't have to have a cell phone number that you exchange with someone, right? You don't have to text somebody in order to bring them into Amorous. Kind of like for WhatsApp, you have to have someone's cell phone number to connect on WhatsApp.
Right.
For Amorous, you send them an invite link. And so if you're on the app, you create a one-time only use link, you send it to the person, they click it, it creates a chat between you. And so if you want to share that link via Reddit, a DM on Reddit, or you want to share that link via OnlyFans, or you want to share that link via an email, or you want to share, there's lots of different ways you could send someone a link, but they don't have to know your cell phone number.
Oh, good. Yeah.
And if you need to change phones that you're using, you can download Amorous and log in on the new phone and then there, and you can use it there. So it's
perfect.
It's sort of easy to transport, and it's a bit more private.
Yeah.
Everything's private, everything's encrypted.
Great.
We built it to have what I call revocable consent, which means anything that you send in the app, whether that's a text message or a picture, you can always take back.
Oh, amazing.
So if you decide in the future that you're like, you know what, we were having a sexy chat and that was a role play and I loved it, except for like that last bit kind of went a bit too far, or we were talking about fantasies and I was like, maybe I'm open to that, but then you're like, it's on second thought, I kind of want to walk that back. You can just go and delete those text messages and they will delete automatically on both sides.
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
Same thing with pictures, automatically on both sides. And in fact, the same thing with the entire relationship. So if at any point in the future you decide that I don't want to be connected to the person anymore, I want to delete this relationship, it will delete for you and for the other person automatically.
I love that. I'm so glad you have that.
I really wanted to build in this idea that just like in sex, consent is active, it is ongoing, it is constantly revocable and changeable. You can say yes to a thing today and decide tomorrow that you no longer wish to be a yes. And that should be incorporated into all of our modes of doing sex, including sexual communication. So
wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I feel like it's, we tried to build a bunch of privacy and security and safety features, as well as build a bunch of games and tools to uplift the conversation, both of them thinking really hard about and owning that this is about sexuality. I think, the majority of sexting is happening on everybody's general messaging app. It's happening on SMS text or WhatsApp or WeChat or Signal or Telegram.
All of those.
Or, and they're all, they all have their benefits. But on all of them, they call themselves a general messaging app, in part because they do not wish to take responsibility for the sexual nature of some of the conversations on their site.
Right.
They want to be able to say, no, we didn't know.
Yeah.
We didn't think that you were using it for that. Whereas I really take the opposite approach. I think I really want to own that I know what this is for. This is for the pursuit of pleasure in consenting adults. But so let's build with that knowledge in mind.
That's great.
And then the other thing I say is that, on any other messaging platform, the real limiting factor is you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was my problem in the pandemic, was that I was like, I can sext with somebody on WhatsApp, but the thing that, like, I'm just not feeling like I'm bringing all of, like, my best self to the table right now, or my most creative self. Like, I could use help.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's missing on a general messaging platform, is that activity aid, is that, ability to, like, make you better at an activity of sexting.
Right.
And so that's where all of our games come in. We also have emojis that are sort of, we have, you can, if you get a text message, you can do an emoji response to it, and we have a set that's sort of designed to help sexting conversations, right? So if you're going to double click on someone's text message and drop an emoji on it, you're going to have, like, a fire eyes that's like a hell yes. But then we've also got a yield sign, because sometimes when you're in a sexting conversation, there's this great rhythm and you're really excited and you really want to stay in it, and then someone says something and you're like, oh, I don't want that, but I don't want to get into why that's kind of triggering. I just want you to, like, walk back 3 steps and, like, turn to the left and try something new. And so putting a little yield sign on something is a really easy way to shortcut what can be really difficult stumbling blocks in a conversation. A little yield sign is like, that's not working, try something else. But it's not like, hey, everything needs to stop because we need to get into how you because that can really abruptly shift the rhythm of the conversation,
or kill it.
Exactly. How do we keep? So these are some of, I'm just sort of telling you lots of different little, like, features and benefits, but these are some of the things that we've incorporated into Amorus to try and make it a space that really makes it better for sexting. And then the last thing I will say is, actually, and this is a feedback I've gotten from a few of our users already, is that the fact that it's sideload means that you actually get the anticipation in a way that you don't sometimes in other platforms. Like, it's
really
sexting with someone actively, like, if you know that what you're doing with them right now is sexting, then of course if you see another message you're like, ooh, that's sexy. But if you're sexting with a partner that you talk to about other things as well, sometimes it's hard to know when it's the sexy thing. Maybe that's just a message about how I should remember to crash out.
Right.
Versus when you're using Amorus, everybody who's using it gets this wonderful, like, spine shiver every time, because if the message Amorus, that's the notif, like, ooh, you've got a little, that little red dot, 1 or the 2 that says you've got new messages in the app.
Fun.
You know that's sexiness waiting for you. Oh. And then so you can have fun even before you read it.
That's great. Oh my gosh. Well, this sounds all, like, super exciting. I've just downloaded the app. Oh my gosh. And I can't wait to take a look around too. Because, like, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it. I don't want you to reveal everything on the app. I want listeners to go to the app and check it out for themselves and see if it jives with them or it resonates with them and have some fun with it. So
I love that. And the thing that I will say also, just sort of for because I want everybody to download and use, but Amorus is designed to be a partnered app. It's designed to be for connection with someone.
Yes.
So it doesn't have a find an anonymous sexter.
Right.
But it really unlocks with another person. So I just want to warn people that, when you join the app on your own, you'll automatically get a first chat, which is with our bot, Amy, who's sort of everybody's friend. And she'll sort of give you some tips and tricks over the time. And we send out some, every so often we send out, like, cool tips for sexting via Amy.
Fun.
But using the games, since the games are about discovering who you are and uncovering shared fantasies and things like that, we wanted the games to be really specific to the relationships.
Right.
So you need to
Cool.
invite a partner and connect with them, and then all the games are unlocked, because when you're choosing your fantasies, you're saying yes and no to fantasies with that person, right? There may
Right.
be, I might have three different friends or three different flames, we like to call them flames, three different flames that I'm talking to on Amorus, and for two of them, bondage is exciting, and for one of them, it's off the table. Or
Right.
the reverse, and so all of the games are all direct in the relationship with the other person, so that those game results are specific to what you want to do with that person. You know that this is,
Right.
I'm choosing
Wow.
this for this relationship.
So personalized. I love that.
Yeah.
That's such a great
Yeah.
feature. I can't wait. I'm going to have to do some homework after this and invite my partner to come play with me.
Yay!
So
I would love that. I want all of the people to go play on Amorous.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really encourage people. Download. Since we're audio,
Yes.
I will specify it is AMORUS. It is a
Yes.
slightly different spelling than the way the dictionary does it.
Yes.
AMORUS. But you can find us in the App Store and Google Play just by searching for that.
don't worry. We're going to plug in all the links in the show notes if people haven't clicked there already. I mean, listening this far, I hope people have already downloaded it by now. So, but I think it's time, Elizabeth, I know you have to go pretty soon. If you want to go into some Q&A quickly.
Sure.
Yeah, let's
Happy
do it. Okay, so the first one is, what are some common mistakes people need to avoid when sexting with a new client?
So I would say the first thing I would say, and I will preface this by saying that I don't sext with sex work, and so I have not done this commercially. I have not done this with a client specifically, but I've made a lot of mistakes in sexting with new people and new strangers.
Yes.
And I would say the first thing is moving too quickly or making assumptions, right? I think getting, like, when you have a new person, one of the things I adore about sexuality is how different we all are and how interesting we all are.
Yes.
I think there is just, the diversity of pleasure and turn-ons is as broad as the diversity of humanity.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
But what I think that means is you cannot assume that you know what someone's going to like. I think if you are a sex worker and you have a very specific clientele, you have a very specific brand that you're putting out in the world, you can probably assume that people want that if they're coming to you.
Yes.
But I think even within that, there is a lot of difference around how do they want that? Do they, do they want, if they may want your look, but what is the feel? What is the atmosphere? What's the tone that they're looking for?
Right.
You may not know that yet, especially if it's been sort of more of if this is someone for whom previously they've just consumed your content, this is the first interaction with them directly. Let's say slow walk it a little bit.
Yeah, take your time.
Ask a lot of questions. Don't assume, okay, you're going to just want me to see this picture because everybody wants to see this picture.
Right.
What would you like? What are you looking for? These are great questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so important because you can't just assume it's like a one size fits all kind of situation. It usually isn't. So great response there. What is your favorite type of fantasy to role play out, if you want to share?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, listener.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, I don't, I'm going to have to think about this for longer. When I think about just, the fantasies that the fantasy or fantasies that I come back to a lot, I would say the most common one is either, some variation on like strangers in a hotel or like a hotel book.
Yes, I love that.
Or like going away to like a cabin in the woods with a hot tub.
Yes.
But I think that, those are partly because pretty much everybody can find fun there. And so
Of
they're like
course.
also my go-to, know that like no matter who I'm talking to, no matter what the rhythm, so with a cabin and a big in a big getaway bed that's not your normal life, or a big
Yeah.
hotel room bed, like that's always fun, and you can find a lot of shared fantasy and shared fun in that.
Yeah.
But then in the specifics of that, is that a fast encounter? Is that an anonymous encounter? Is that a super slow and seductive encounter?
Right.
Is there a roaring fire and then, a tea lodge, or is it like a tiki hut on a beach staring out at the Caribbean? All of those are details that are different every time.
Totally. Totally. I love all of those scenarios, by the way. I love that.
Well, I'm a huge fan, and I guess this is another tip or trick I should have offered, but just think about your senses, think about your words, think about like drawing pictures for people with your images or with your words when you're sexting. In the movie business, we talk a lot about how specificity is, in some ways, is the most emotionally universal. That, like, trying to be universal, trying to say something that everyone will like, it usually ends up being bland and nobody, and just sort of banal, because it doesn't mean anything. It's in the specifics. It's in like a very specific story about, I don't know, a young girl in the Bronx trying to become a boxer, that like we learn big universal lessons about triumph and about not quitting and about keeping, but the story itself is like a very specific person and time and place.
Right.
And so specificity is really powerful in storytelling.
Yes.
What does that shiver in your spine feel like? What smell, makes you just, like it totally turns you on? It's the smell of apple pie, or it's the smell of gasoline, or it's the smell of cut grass or new paint, or it could be weird, it could be interesting, but that specificity in your conversation makes people really feel like they're there and makes it a lot more.
Yeah, that's such a great tip. Yeah, really, really tapping into your senses there, because like I think people get hesitant or are kind of scared about sexting sometimes because, like, one, you got to think on the balls of your feet, and also two, I think people have this misconception that you have to be like an erotic author to sext, which isn't the point, as you said. Just like describing scenarios,
just describing, and just being
all it
human.
Is. Yeah,
it's
being
so
human.
Powerful to just be human with another. To feel like you are sharing an authentic experience with a real other person.
Absolutely.
Remarkably powerful.
Cool. We have 1.5 more questions. I say half because I have a half question that I didn't get to ask earlier. But the last question from a listener is, how do you deal with the requests that you're uncomfortable with or have never tried?
So I think that when it's uncomfortable with, I think that that's a space to be establishing boundaries.
Yes.
And I think that figuring out, and there's a lot of ways that you can communicate where that boundary is, but communicating that, that's not something I do. That's not something I would like to talk about. That's not something that's part of my repertoire. That's not a service that I offer. That doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel appropriate to me. That doesn't feel like that reflects where I am right now.
Right.
But I think it's really important to establish boundaries, and where they talk about, in conversations between couples, sometimes keeping it personal. So it's not I don't like you, or I don't like what you said, but just that doesn't make me feel comfortable, or that makes me that makes me uncomfortable. That makes me that doesn't feel exciting to me. That doesn't get me excited. That doesn't get me passionate. That doesn't get me aroused. That doesn't turn me on. I think in sexting with whether a client, a partner, anyone, nobody, or I shouldn't say nobody, but most people aren't interested in a one-person experience.
Yes.
Like, they don't want to be doing this if it's not exciting to the other person.
Of course.
Even if it's a commercial experience, they want to feel like it's exciting to you. So if you are saying, hey, this isn't exciting to me, that's kind of a boner killer, actually.
Yeah.
Then the other person is likely to say, oh, well, okay, and then the other thing to think about is there a way to communicate that as a no but, kind of like a yes and. I don't like that, but what about this? I'd love to talk about this. That doesn't feel good to me, but a different version of that, or this other thing that incorporates maybe one of those elements I am comfortable with that you want, into a different scene, into a different scenario, into a different context. This would be something I'd like to do with you. This is something that would make me excited. This is something that would be delicious. Giving somebody not just a no, but a direction to turn to find a yes.
Yeah, really, really great points there. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you for that.
Happy to. Yeah.
And I'll try to squeeze in my personal question here. I know we're running short on time, so I'll quickly go through it. But in terms of like sex tech and like sex startups, because I've worked with startups before in where I am here in Vancouver, but how is it being a woman founder in like a predominantly male-dominated space with a product in an industry that is so stigmatized? And how do you get past these barriers?
So it's interesting. I actually don't feel that. I think that there's in the wider world of sex tech, there are a lot of men, but I think there's this wonderful group of women in sex tech. There's this rising core class, and I think of there's a women a few years ahead of me who are significantly even more successful, that have products that are on the market. That's everything from this whole new class company world of people making new vibrators really oriented around sexual wellness and women. And so those are women-led companies like Lioness, like Unbound, or non-binary led companies. There's a great shop called NB. There's Maud. There's a few of them. And then there's also like really cool tech that's female driven. So Barley and Dipsy and Coral and Blue Heart, a lot of this sort of up and coming sexual discovery and kind of apps for learning about your own pleasure and learning yourself. A lot of those are actually are female driven companies.
Amazing.
And so I actually feel like I'm part of a really cool cohort.
For sure.
I'm really happy to be kind of following in the footsteps of really exciting, powerful, smart, educated women, women and women identifying sort of femmes who have done a lot of work. But it's also, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think within the worlds of sex tech, it's a pretty small world, and everyone's been really supportive because we're all fighting the good fight.
Yes.
In the wider world, it is interesting to see. I think one of the things I have learned is you don't know nothing. So I will, and what I mean by I will pitch, and I will be talking to somebody about my app, and I can have 5 people, and I'll be like, okay, from these 5 people, these 2 are the ones who are going to be supportive, and those 3 are going to think this is weird. And then it'll be the total reverse, right? Like sexuality is a thing we just don't talk about, so we just don't know what people think about it. And so I've had these meetings where I'm like, oh yeah, this is some old white guy who's not going to understand at all.
Yes.
And then he starts talking, and I'm like, oh man, you are dropping terms, and I am aware of your, you are someone who plays in a lot of spaces. Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's so fun. So revealing.
So it's fascinating. I mean, it's always interesting too, because you're the person who shows up and is comfortable talking about this. I mean, as I'm sure all of your listeners are, and sometimes just being that person, sometimes people get really uncomfortable. Sometimes people get way too comfortable.
Yeah, I get that too.
The experience of realizing, oh, I'm the first person in 5 years who's been comfortable talking about sex around you, and so then there's this dam inside this person with all pent up things, and then it just has to kind of come out on you, and you're like, I was telling you about my tech app, and now I'm getting a whole lot of your sexual history.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
That totally happens a lot. I find.
Like, I'm the first person you've ever had to share this with, so you're sharing whatever happens. Okay.
We all have an oversharer in our community, right?
Yeah, but it's fun. I mean, so far it has been a really amazing journey.
Oh, well, this is so exciting and like thank you so much for coming on to share your journey with us, and congratulations on the launch. I really hope some people go ahead and download it and play with it and use it with their partners or their clients.
I would just love to put out there that we are in the process of starting a partner program. I would, thinking about how would we build that? How would we, optimize Amorus for someone to use with a lot of clients as opposed to use just with, 1 or 2 or 3 personal connections. And so if there's anyone who tries out Amorus, who really loves it, and wants to use that, use it with clients, I would love you to reach out. I'd love to hear feedback, because we would really love to find ways to create a first cohort of a partner program, and how can we optimize, and how can, we're a very baby app, so we're just new and learning how to fix things and upgrade and add features. And so I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to use this for clients, offer this as a way to connect with, VIPs or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to chat about what you need and how you're. Yeah, so you can reach out to me, Elizabeth Dell. You can, on Twitter. You can also, honestly, inside the app, just send a message to Amy, the bot, and that's our support system, and I will get that message eventually.
Perfect. Yeah. So whoever's listening, feel free to use this as a great opportunity. They're in beta mode right now, so go ahead and give it a try. Play around with it. Have some fun. And Elizabeth, before I let you go, besides your Twitter, was there anywhere else that you would like to promote, or where else can we find you or get in touch?
Yeah. So the website for Amorus is amorus.net. So I'll just amorus.net.
Okay.
And then all of our socials are at Amorus app. So just the Amorus with APP added to the end. Amorus app is us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, all of the places. So if you want to follow, if you want to tweet at us or DM, those are available. So we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And all of those links are going to be available in the show notes if you haven't checked it out already. And don't forget, it's new episodes every single Sunday. It is Strip by Sia on Twitter, as well as my Instagram is also Strip by Sia, or my personal, which is Sia Steph. And we'll catch everyone in for a new episode next Sunday. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy to be here.
Likewise. Thank you. Bye. You're listening to Strip by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia, artwork by Maria Bellandarama, music by Ted D, and photography by Ian Dabern.